2020.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the ISSA Los Angeles meeting for November. Appreciate your attendance at this virtual meeting. Our plan is to, at some point in 2022, to go live, but until then, we're doing our best to get awesome speakers, great topics for discussions. ISSA is the founding chapter, founded by Sandra Lambert back many decades ago, and it went international. And we're all about InfoSec and ensuring the confidential availability and integrity of all the information out there. I want to give a shout out to a wonderful group of individuals who selflessly share their time and effort to bring you these meetings, to bring you the annual summit, which we are planning to have in May of 2022. Mark your calendars. But thank you to my fellow board members. Wonderful stuff. We work hard for you, and you can join our community as well. You can sign up to get our newsletter. It's not spam, I promise. But visit us as ISSA-LA.org and stay connected with your fellow peers and keep up when all of our events, we have trainings and meetings. A big shout out to our educational sponsors who have provided discounted training and opportunities for you to improve yourself and be prepared for your job and for who knows what comes your way from the cyber criminal workforce. And then there's social media. We'd love to have you connect with us and do a little dialogue. We try to share interesting articles on all of these platforms, and dialogue is important. We're missing that by having these virtual meetings. We love that face-to-face and interactions, but let's for now, up our social media game and have some debates, discussions, sharing of ideas and thoughts. More meetings are coming. Don't worry, we have not missed one yet, even through the pandemic. In December, we have Chad Brewston doing security for startups. More and more startups have been coming alive in the past 3-4 years. It's been quite an increase. Chad will share some of his personal experiences. January 19th, we're working on a couple of items, but I didn't want to put it there because we haven't gotten confirmation yet. That one will be a lunchtime one for those of you who like those. We sprinkle those in every third or fourth meeting. February, in honor of Valentine's Day, we're having Abe Chen, the CISO of Tinder. So that should be interesting. We're still working on the topic. And then in March, that's our goal is in person. So those of you listening who are planning spreading events in Thanksgiving and December, please be careful so we can all meet in person. And Jeff Tutton will be talking about PCI and forensics, and that's back in the evening once again. Now you folks have the opportunity to participate in this. You can do it using an app called Slido, and it's very simple. You can post anonymously or you can enter your name. It's up to you. So all you have to do is go to sli.do, and then there's a place to enter the code, and the code is ISSA-LA. Once you do that, we'll see the questions, and at certain points throughout this evening's conversation with our excellent panelists, you will be able to have your questions addressed. So please do feel free. And again, no pressure. You want to do it anonymously, that's okay too. Speaking of our panelists, we've got a wonderful lineup today, a very diverse group of professionals whose jobs interact with the maritime industry. There has been a lot of talk about what's going on out there with all the backlogs and issues. We wonder, what's the story with security in the shipping industry? We depend on that industry more than we even know. We stop and think about the impact on our lives. It can be quite dramatic, but fortunately we have folks like the ones on this call today who are they're here to share their experiences and their thoughts on where we're headed. I wanted to just share a little bit about our moderator, who will then introduce the rest of the panelists. Lori Barfield is a dear friend who's been in the community here in Los Angeles for quite some time. She was an engineering executive and is now the co-founder of the annual ShellCon InfoSec conference and the driving force behind Raise Me career development effort that began there. I've been to ShellCon, a fantastic conference. Lori, hats off to you. She's also a longtime chair of the Southern California Linux Expo. Now, I know you've heard of that. North America's largest grassroots open source conference. Now, her passion for maritime cybersecurity arose from her service in the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, where she's a red teamer in the National Cybersecurity Division. She's also a flotilla officer. Where's the thumb go? I'm bad at this. And for the 114-0509 at the Port of Los Angeles, and a shipmate who enjoys going out on search and rescue and helo ops training missions. So Lori, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for agreeing to moderate this panel. It's all yours, my friend.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Welcome to all of our attendees today. And thank you very much to our panelists for coming. I'm going to try to share my screen here, if you'll just give me a moment. And let's just confirm that, can everybody see this okay? Okay. All right. So this, as Richard mentioned, this topic is near and dear to me as a cybersecurity engineer, and also as a founder of the Information Security Conference. The educational side of things is a passion. My work with the auxiliary puts me in patrolling the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach on a regular basis when there isn't COVID-19. The thing about Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach is it's not just precious to us local here, ISSA, it's not just precious to the folks here, but to the entire nation, because 40% of the imports that come into the United States pass through our waters here. But I didn't know anything about maritime cybersecurity until I started helping out myself. And one of the things that surprised me about it is, although their technologies are special and they do have unique issues with manpower and shipboard security and things like that, maritime cybersecurity resembles other kinds of cybersecurity in uncanny ways. And like other kinds of cybersecurity issues, it's about combating cybercrime, whether the targets are military or civilian or municipal. And that's exponentially more difficult than combating traditional criminal activities. And maritime industries are especially vulnerable, but in many ways, they have the same challenges as private enterprises, large and small. So you'll hear a lot of the issues that I know you're facing every day in the stories and the anecdotes and in the solutions that our panelists here today are going to share with us. So those issues can be intellectual property theft, financial losses, the disruption of supply chains. And in the past 4 years, the 4 largest cargo carriers on the planet have all been compromised in a very serious way, 1 per year. So nobody is invulnerable. And the ports themselves have been victims shut down by ransomware, whether it's the municipal ports or individual operations at the ports, from San Diego, just most recently Houston, even Long Beach, China. The port of Kennewick is a really famous event that happened. So the same kinds of headlines that we see in traditional industries are the kinds of headlines that hit the maritime industry as well. And our expert panelists today are going to educate us on the issues and the solutions and what keeps them awake at night. So just to reintroduce myself a little bit, you may recognize my name through my work with the open source conferences, and also those are some images of talks and my work with the Coast Guard Auxiliary. Our three panelists today, I'll introduce each one before they give us their, before they talk for us, but Stephen Mills is the Director of Maritime Cybersecurity at Royal Caribbean Group. Gary Kessler is the Chief of Cybersecurity, Chief of the Cybersecurity Augmentation Branch at the United States Coast Guard Auxiliary, and in USCGX, I'm sorry, getting this wrong, Principal Consultant, and Fathom 5. Daniel is Chair for the Marine Technology Society's Maritime Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Committee. Those are our panelists this evening. And we're going to start with Stephen. And here is his biography to help you give the context for what he's going to share with us. Mr. Mills retired from the U.S. Navy as a commander after 28 years of service. He's a graduate of Old Dominion University with electrical engineering degree and was commissioned an ensign through the Naval Reserve Officer Training Program. Mr. Mills began his naval career as a surface warfare officer, serving in leadership roles on a variety of ships, including 2 tours as a chief engineer. Following an assignment at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, where he studied system engineering and information warfare, he transferred to the information professional community and served in senior leadership roles, including the Director of Afloat Communication for Commander 2nd Fleet, Military Deputy Director, CIO J6 at U.S. Southern Command, and as Combat System Officer aboard the USS Ronald Reagan. His final tour in the U.S. Navy was at U.S. Fleet Forces Command, where he served as a Cyber Operations Chief and Deputy CIO N6. He's currently the Director of Maritime Cybersecurity for Royal Caribbean Group, where he is responsible for driving the maritime cybersecurity strategy and program initiatives for all their brands, including Royal Caribbean International, Silver Sea Cruise Lines, Celebrity Cruise Lines, and TUI. He's the subject matter expert to C-suite leaders across all RCG's shipboard lines of business regarding maritime cyber risks, where he leads teams that provide cyber risk management and insurance to RCG shipboard environments, including new ship builds consisting of operational technology, navigation bridge, marine engineering, IT, hotel operation systems, and onboard entertainment systems. He ensures these systems and technologies align to global information security standards and maritime cybersecurity guidelines. Additionally, he influences the maritime industry by partnering with organizations such as CLIA, the United States Coast Guard, and maritime research institutions to improve and promote cybersecurity throughout the maritime industry. Mr. Mills has a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, a Master's of Science in Systems Engineering, Cyber, and a Master of Arts in National Security and Strategic Studies. He also has a CIO certification from the National Defense University is an active Board of Directors member for the Maritime Transportation System Information Sharing and Analysis Center, Old Dominion University School of Cybersecurity, and a member of the South Florida AFCEA chapter. All right. Thank you, and take it away, Stephen.
Wow, thanks, Lori. That was. It sounds a lot better when you read it off like that. So, but thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for your patience.
It's fine. And Richard for having me speak at this panel. I think this is great because maritime cybersecurity has obviously been a passion for me for a better part of 3 decades. And so I just want to talk about a few things here that as I got into the role, I've been at Royal Caribbean Group for a little over a year now. And granted, most of that's been a kind of a lockdown with COVID, but we're just now beginning to get back in operation. And I'm getting my teams back out on the ships doing things that we need to do to protect them. So that's sort of exciting. And we actually just got back in the office a couple of weeks ago as well down here in South Florida. but these are some of the things that I'm sort of passionate about when I've got here. So culture is in order to really understand, I guess, culture within maritime. I tell people that don't understand, you have to kind of look at the history of maritime in general. I think maritime cybersecurity is way behind other communities within cybersecurity. So I think banking and healthcare and those types of industries we're certainly behind, but we're making some pretty good strides. But you're looking at the history of the whole thing. It's like, you go back, hundreds of years. I mean, mariners took off, they took their lines in, they set their ships and they went off to sea, and they basically had to do everything themselves. They were the fire department, they were the police department, they got their own food, they got their own water, they did everything on their own. Very, very independent. And a lot of that mentality really hasn't changed over the years. And so as communication started back, World War II, you started getting radios. And so that kind of became a little bit of a leash, but they were still independent. And then now with cyber, the systems are getting more and more connected as they go. And so we're pulling the maritime community kicking and screaming into, into the modern era here. But things are changing, and that's good. But culture is so that's culture in general. Culture Royal Caribbean Group is really a challenge we have with our industry, because you got to think of something. So we've got ships from 4 different brands with 4 different sort of, views and individual cultures themselves. We have individuals from 60 different nationalities throughout the world. We're a global company with things all over the place. The ships operate around the world in all the time zones as well. And then you add the short-term contracts for a lot of these folks that come on anywhere from 3, 6, or 9 months. And so how do you develop this sort of a culture, of cybersecurity when you have that type of environment? And, fixing culture isn't a fix, 100% fix of this stuff, but it certainly does kind of give you, an understanding, or at least helps mitigate some of the things that are out there. So I like to look at it as, back in my old damage control chief engineering model, is that when we would go on the ship when I was in the Navy, and you'd be able to tell how well trained ships were, you'd ask them how every sailor on there, how do you put out fires? What is this? How do you operate this CO2 bottle? How do you operate this fire hose? And so this damage control model that we can completely ingrain in our sailors, from everybody from the captain all the way down, it's drilled into every level of training that they have. They understand that, and it's beaten into them from the boot camp time all the way through the time they get out of the Navy. There's not a sailor out there that won't be able to tell you how to operate any damage control stuff. So I really think we need to get to the point within our industry, and that's something what I'm trying to strive for within Royal Caribbean Group, is just how do we model in our train, and we get the crews to sort of think that way. So everyone understands the general stuff. They have this baseline understanding of cybersecurity, especially coming from all these different countries where they may or may not have any cybersecurity or even know anything about it. Thumb drives, it's cyber hygiene stuff, primarily of that stuff. So that's a real big challenge. And so it's a lot of training. It's a lot of sort of work in doing that. So that's something we definitely are trying to work through really hard on that. The second bullet there, maritime OT systems. When the Maritime Cybersecurity Unit was developed at Royal Caribbean about 4 years ago, it was primarily designed to fill a gap on OT systems. We looked at IT, we looked at a lot of different things prior to this, but we really didn't look too much at navigation and propulsion systems. So that was where the gap was. So they created this Maritime Cybersecurity Division, and they started looking into that. And we've done a pretty good job at this point of identifying the assets, monitoring the assets. Next step is to obviously get them through so they can be monitored and tracked through Splunk and through other systems that way, which we're working hard to. But the reality of it is there's a lot more out there on these ships than just those 2 systems of maritime within propulsion and navigation. So, we call them ET, is what I think my predecessor coined the term for entertainment technologies. But really what it really is unregulated OT. And it's all these other things that are out there. So think of, the door locks for the guest. Think of the bionic bartender we have on our ships, or the dive platforms, or the waterworks that happens, the water slides, all those types of entertainment stuff, all the way down to things like our washing machines, the laundry, the soda machines, virtual reality systems that are on the casino. It goes on and on and on. So there's so many different systems that are on board these ships to give the guest experience what they want and what they're paying for, what they really, what we at Royal Caribbean Group strive for our guests. But they're all getting more and more connected. and they're reaching back out through the web, through the cloud to be able to get their uploads, their downloads. So those all have to be protected. And so, and it never stops. It's expanding and expanding and expanding pretty rapidly. So, one of the interesting things that I find on the cruise ships compared to my days with the Navy is that the Navy, we would have basically, two risks. We call it, there's a risk to mission and a risk to force, right? So your risk to your operating mission, you want to protect everything so that you can actually go out there and put missiles on target and do your job. So that's one. Risk to a force is obviously the people. But in this business, you also have what I call a risk to brand. So your brand, the Royal Caribbean Group is a pretty good brand and a high brand on that. So all those other types of systems. So if you take out one or two of these entertainment systems or something, it's not really going to hurt the operations of the ship. I mean, if you decide to brick the elevators or do something like that, the ship's still going to be able to operate. You're still going to be able to be safety. The guests and the crew aren't going to be at risk. But if you do too many of those things, people, now people losing out on their entertainment value that they're there. They start to talk and they take pictures, or they put, online, they make reviews and stuff. So there's a brand risk there that's very important. So we also have to take that into account in this role too, that we have to watch out for those types of things. So trying to, pick and choose and which one we're going to try to cover and try to get to all those is quite the challenge. So that's certainly one of the other challenges that we face. So, and then the third thing is resiliency. And again, I think that's pretty common. All of us sort of understand that, but it was drilled into our heads, at least in my military background, where, you have to be able to continue to fight. And for military operations, that's pretty straightforward, right? You have to be able to continue to operate even though you're getting hit. But in this world, it's not a matter, no matter how much tools and segmentation and things that you have on board the ships, which you have a lot of, something's going to happen at some point, just like every company. And so how do you react to that? How quick can you get around that? And then how can you get back to normal operations? Is it by doing backups? Is it by doing, there's a litany of things that you can go after to make sure that you can bounce back for that stuff. And so one of the things that I'm trying to work with within the company is, taking current and existing systems we already have out there. And again, I model it after my engineering background. So we do engineering drills all the time on the ships. When you have a casualty, you lose fuel pressure, you lose electrical power. The engineers have to go through this, constantly drilled into their head as they do the operation. Same with loss of steering, same with all those types of casualties. So, we have to basically weave into an existing system where everybody already knows how to react, or at least knows the immediate actions, and then make a cyber nexus. So, not everything's going to be a cyber an event, but you need to have those guys when they go through their drills and go through their planning, they're at least thinking that, well, what if it is a cyber? What do we need to do? Who do we need to call? We have to we have to rule that out by bringing in the right people to check about that stuff. And it could just be, well, nope, it's not. Obviously the fuel line broke and we lost pressure because of that, or the flex hose, whatever the reason was. That's fine, because that's probably going to be 99% of the time anyway. But the reality of it is, I want all those guys that are never used to thinking about cyber to start thinking that there might be a cyber nexus in this as well. And so using existing systems or procedures that we already have on board the ships, it will help facilitate that and make that go a lot faster. And so those are some of the things I really want to do and work with training to try to improve on the ship as well for the resiliency. So those three are my big things. And if I was going to say one thing that probably keeps me up at night, and I think it's probably pretty common across most of the folks in my department and either above and below me, is basically, somebody comes in, ransomware attack, whatever the reason is, that ends up taking over, the ship's propulsion systems or their navigation systems, so that, my worst day would be a cyber attack that it turns into that picture there. Yeah, we don't want to have that, that happen, where you run either something aground or something of that nature. Yeah, that hurts people, that hurts equipment, the environmental risk. There's all kinds of things in there. So I think those are the things that that's a very, very high level, type worry that I have. But that's certainly the one of the things that keep me up at night. If I was going to pick one.
Thank you, Stephen. All right. Next up, we have Gary Kessler. I'll give you a little more detail about Gary so you understand the context for what he'd like to tell us about. Gary says, I've been involved in the information security field since the late 1970s, starting with my undergraduate degree from Humboldt State. I'm a retired professor of cybersecurity, principal consultant at Fathom 5, and a non-resident senior fellow of the Atlantic Council's Cyber Statecraft Initiative. I'm the co-author of Maritime Cybersecurity, a guide for leaders and managers, as well as many other books, articles, and papers. I am also the chief of the Cyber Augmentation Branch in the Cybersecurity Directorate of the U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary, and was a visiting faculty member in the Electrical Engineering and Cyber Systems section of the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. My current research efforts have been related to maritime cybersecurity with an emphasis on AIS and maritime communication protocol vulnerabilities. I'm also a scuba instructor with a 50-ton captain's license. All right, Gary, take it away.
Okay, thank you very much. And like Steve said, it's very, very nice to be here, and I appreciate the invitation. When you're listing all that stuff, Lori, I'm reminded that I occasionally tell my wife that I'm retired, and she occasionally reminds me that I apparently don't really know what that word means. So there are a couple of items I would like to bring up to provide, again, context to where I come from on this. First of all, one of the points that I like to make when I talk to people is to think of the United States as a maritime nation. I think when you ask most people, if you were to ask most people on the street, is the US a maritime nation? They would say things like, well, I own a friend, or I have a friend who owns a fishing boat, or I've seen all those TV shows about yachts of the rich and famous, but they don't really appreciate the very, very direct impact that maritime has on everything that goes on in this nation. If you just start with the economic impact alone, maritime contributes about $5.4 trillion annually to the U.S. gross domestic product. The U.S. gross domestic product is about 19 trillion. That means that maritime is responsible for more than 25% of the GDP. It supports 30 million jobs, and something on the order of 90% of all the imports and exports from this country come by ship. You guys right now acutely know more than most that the majority of those imports and exports, about 40%, come through the ports of LA and Long Beach. And so again, when you think about the economic security, the food security, energy security, national security, by which I include defense, maritime is incredibly important to that. And so again, I think that classifies us as a maritime nation. And without putting too fine a point on this, I would like to make the following observation. If all of a sudden something happened whereby all aircraft no longer could fly, all of us would be very unhappy, and we'd have to get over it. If all the ships stopped sailing, our nation would be in trouble. We don't manufacture enough of our own goods. We don't produce enough of our own food. Very, very literally, maritime and loss of maritime is an existential threat. So again, my point is we're very much a maritime nation, which is why we really do have to care about this stuff. The next thing I want to point out is, when we talk about maritime, it almost sounds monolithic. And like every other critical infrastructure, it is very much not monolithic. When you think about maritime, again, most people think about, okay, we got ships, we got ports. However, Steve represents a shipping line. Lori already mentioned that maritime has the same cybersecurity problems everybody else does, plus we have some that are unique to our industry. So we have ships. I've got shipping lines, which are separate and distinct. I've got ports. I've got inland waterways. I have the people, the cargo. And so again, there is no solution, if you will. I hate to use air quotes in Zoom, but there is no solution per se to the problems in the maritime space because, again, it's not monolithic. Nobody owns it. Nobody controls it. And if you're talking about something global, consider that aspect of maritime as well. There's something on the order of 70 to 80,000 commercial cargo vessels. And that number may or may not include passenger vessels as well. And most passenger vessels, of course, are very interesting because they start someplace and they end up at the same place. Cargo vessels are constantly, of course, moving all around the world. By the way, of those 70,000 cargo vessels or something like that, something on the order of 100, give or take 10 or 20, are US flagged vessels. There are frightfully few US flagged vessels in the merchant marine fleet. And of course, like I said, there's nobody really in charge. There's the International Maritime Organization is the nearest thing we have, but it's a UN agency and countries can in fact choose to not comply. In any case, the last thing I want to talk about, because I think this is where so much of our cyber attack vector is actually expanding in maritime rather than contracting. Now, we always talk about trying to minimize your attack surface. Maritime, like I said, it's actually getting bigger. We've got the Maritime Transportation System meeting Industry 4.0. That's pretty much where the state of our industry is right now. And the first line that's there says something about digitization and digitalization of the MTS. And I'd actually like to take about 45 seconds and, well, maybe a minute, and define what I think I mean by those terms. Digitization is merely the conversion, if you will, of an analog process to a digital one. So if I think about this in terms of telephony, when I was a kid, telephone calls were all analog. Everything was analog in the system. My voice is analog. The transference of the information was analog. And then in the 1960s, we started to digitize the telephone network. So now we're taking my analog voice, we're converting it to zeros and ones. And there were all sorts of efficiencies and cost savings. And I'm not going to go into that because I don't really care about that right now. But the point is that digitization did a couple of things. Because everything was digital, it now meant that there were easy ways to store telephone calls, if you will. And since they had to be repeated every so often and regenerated, there was that kind of storage. So all of a sudden, with digital systems, we find we can store historic information. That means we get the beginning of big data. From there, we get machine learning, and we get algorithms to form artificial intelligence based upon all of the data and all the samples that we have. But the other important aspect of digitization of the telephone network, in any case, is it didn't change the process. If I wanted to make a phone call, I picked up the phone, I dialed the number, and literally back then we dialed the number. And nobody could tell that we didn't have an analog network anymore. Digitalization is a revolution. It is a true, honest-to-God transformation. It's when somebody sat down and said, wait a minute, voice is now a bunch of zeros and ones, so is audio, so is video, so is data. I can build networks and a single network infrastructure that combines all that stuff. And now I can build applications that can combine all that stuff. And now I can build devices that can combine all that stuff. And that's where we get Industry 4.0. And that's where we get, again, the transformation of the industry. You tack on to that advances in microprocessor technology and sensor technology and communications. That's what gives us operational technology. And, you're all familiar with the concepts of the Internet of Things. Well, there's the maritime Internet of Things. There's the ship of things. DARPA is working on the ocean of things. And so, like I said, what's happening is we're also grossly expanding our attack surface. And at the same time, nobody is really securing operational technology very well. Just like we're not cyber protecting the Internet of Things very well, but that's a slightly different story, but related. So after mentioning all of those things, I think the next slide shows the kind of stuff that I worry about. And partially I worry about this stuff because of my research interests. Steve already alluded to attacks on nav systems, and I go a little bit further. The attacks on GPS in particular have become absolutely weaponized. We have adversaries who know how to pretty much pick off GPS at any time that they want to, and they have. And we have seen in the last couple of days, you've all heard about the space debris coming near the International Space Station because Russia blew up a satellite. Well, Russia's late to the game of blowing up satellites. The Chinese have had anti-satellite capability for quite a while. And I observed that our primary adversaries have land-based navigation system backup and augmentation to GPS. And yet we highly are dependent upon GPS for nearly every one of our critical infrastructures. If nothing else, timing, even if not absolute positioning. Related to that is AIS. AIS is the situational awareness system that we use in maritime. And AIS is a wonderful, wonderful protocol developed in the 1990s. And just like the internet wasn't built with security in mind, because why would anybody attack the internet? Well, why would anybody attack AIS? AIS does not have integrity checking. It doesn't have authentication. There's all sorts of things it doesn't have. So it's very, very easy to spoof GPS. And the spoofing of GPS has also escalated. I'm sorry, of AIS has also escalated in the last several years. So like I said, that's what I spend a lot of time working on. The other thing that we're having, that we have to deal with is autonomous systems in the maritime transportation system, and not just autonomous systems on board a ship, but a ship that is in fact itself autonomous. And for any of you mariners out there, of course, you're all familiar with the collision regulations. Well, how do I apply the collision regulations to an autonomous vessel that does not have people on board, that has perhaps remote control or remote sensors that are providing me my lookout capability and those kind of things? And I observe that it is naive to believe that I can be a remote captain of a vessel and communicate with a vessel, and nobody else can ever communicate with that vessel. And so that's the kind of stuff I think about and I worry about. So with that, Lori, I will kick it back to you.
Thank you, Gary. That's very sobering. All right, next up with an opening statement, we have Daniel Garcini. He's the chair of the Marine Technology Society's Maritime Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Committee. He's a systems engineering integration innovator and leading expert in trusted managed services. Daniel's achieved trusted authority certifications for public and private enterprises. He's pivotal in achieving the vision of implementing the next generation of cybersecurity as a serial entrepreneur and as an expert consultant providing education and training in information assurance and cybersecurity policy, practices, and technology integration. Dan has provided training for continuing education programs for over 2 decades in information assurance and cybersecurity certifications. He's the lead trainer for the Maritime Institute of Technology and Graduate Studies, cyber skilled mariner courses, and has been a guest expert lecturer in cyber and risk management at Marymount University, and is a cybersecurity maturity model certification certified provisional instructor. Dan chairs the Maritime Technology Society, Maritime Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Committee, and vice chairs the ISSA-LA, Homeland Security Committee, where he actively evangelizes for the protection of critical infrastructure and citizen privacy. On ISSA-LA's Educational Foundation Board, he's dedicated to providing educational incentives, opportunities, and assistance in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. He holds a BS degree from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, a dual license, and a master's from the George Washington University, where he also completed the required credit hours in a formal program of study at the graduate level beyond master's study in pursuit of a doctoral program in systems engineering and applied sciences, concentrated in information assurance and cybersecurity. So that is Daniel's perspective, and here is Daniel.
Well, thank you very much, Lori, and thank you for the introduction. And thank you all for paying attention and sitting through these quick discussions here. I'd like to talk to you a little bit from a different perspective and maybe tell a story about why, what keeps me up at night and why. So I've been doing cybersecurity for some time. As Lori mentioned, I am a mariner. I actually sailed out of Long Beach my second class year, my junior year, for those of you that don't have that connection, but for about 6 months in and out of the Asian corridor, as well as up the Alaska and pipeline up the West Coast. I'd like to echo what Gary said about the maritime nation and the American flag. So whenever you talk to your congressmen and senators, let them know that the Jones Act is hugely important. We actually need to bolster our maritime industry dramatically, because right now we are at a handicap. And that same handicap, I think, is also in our cybersecurity practices. We've been doing this for a long time. We've changed the name, right? Information security, information assurance, and now we got cybersecurity. But the root problems, the root causes of what's happening are pretty much the same. And we haven't done a lot about it over the last 25 or so years. From a risk management versus mitigating vulnerabilities perspective, I think we've fallen in love with this risk management process, and it's good. It's a good process, but it's almost been to the point we're abandoning mitigating vulnerabilities. We have done very little in the way of meaningful change. We rely on consultants and organizations focusing on legacy technologies and techniques, and we stack redundant symmetric authentication capabilities, and we avoid moving into the next generation. Security by obscurity, which died a ugly death years ago, has once again become, in many ways, good enough to satisfy risk management objectives. It's all about getting the paper done, getting the check marks done, and moving away. We have a lot of emphasis on cyber hygiene. I'm an instructor. I think cyber hygiene is terribly important, but we give it too much emphasis, because the use of training and awareness of cyber is only as effective as everybody has the tools to use and correctly protect against cyber. I use the bell curve because at the end of the day, no matter what you go through in whether it's a training or academy or university, most people get out right around a C, if we're lucky, right? And what I'm trying to say is everybody's not proficient. Cyber is unique in that only a very small or single malicious or even non-malicious activity causes huge consequences. So I think we need to look a little bit more at putting tools in people's hands that account for and overcome their human frailty. And then the point of cyber training versus our old NISPOM or security training, again, that is more confined because we had a combined amount of people. Everybody touches cyber, and Gary mentioned, whether you're on the bridge, doing things on navigation or cargo or whatever, or you're in the galley playing online on the internet, whether you're at sea or you're plugged into the internet at a port. There's all these dynamics going on, and I think just training people, while terribly important, I think we got to give them the tools, and we've not done that effectively. This is particularly important in the maritime industry. As Gary alluded to, the maritime is a system of systems. It is a city, a floating city, and that moves from one location to another. And today you're in the United States, tomorrow you're in Brazil, the next day you may be in the Mediterranean or Asia. And you're plugging things in, people are coming on board, maybe updating systems and stuff like that. And then we rely on all these other systems, the systems in space, the satellites, et cetera, whether it be other navigational aids, a myriad of things. And then we got information coming in from the home office, whether that be cargo information or maintenance information. And even now we have engines and generators and many equipments on our vessels that have a direct link, or maybe not a direct link, but a turn on, turn off link to the manufacturer. So the manufacturer has a link into some of our systems. How do we know what is being done? Confidentiality, from an integrity point of view, and most important, or as important, is availability. Now, we all know, I think, what confidentiality is and integrity, and we need to authenticate and things like that. Why availability? Well, availability is important because if a sailor, especially a sailor, if they can't get to what they need and the tools they need to get the job done, they're going to work around it. They're going to do something different. And therein lies a big part of the problem. So how do we get to data we can trust? So at the end of the day, as I said earlier, we still have a common root vulnerability. And we've been dealing with this forever. I got this cartoon on the left from 1993. I added the Chinese flag, but there's nothing uncommon or unique or anything about this that is not true today. We still don't know with any kind of confidence who or what is on the other end. We just don't. And our adversaries are using that against us. I was doing a presentation for another, actually for my seminar on CMMC training in a couple of weeks. And I came across a number of somewhere around $600 billion a year is being lost in intellectual property, money that is being either in research or other areas that is being exfiltrated into those other areas. And the last point I want to make is, it doesn't matter whether it's over the internet or you're plugging into something or you using a USB drive to plug into a computer, that all introduces vulnerabilities. Those are all things that can be authenticated with high levels of authentication and protection. Last, the irony. Why aren't we moving into asymmetric technology? Why aren't we moving more quickly into the next phase of our cybersecurity? The irony is that the ransomware, which really isn't the attack is the phishing. So we let people in the front door. That's the dog there. Nobody knows who he is. We let him in the front door, and then they put something in there that attacks us, this ransom attack. And this ransomware uses the same technology we developed to keep people out of our data, to keep bad people, only authorized people in our data. They're using that same technology to keep you out of your data. So it can work. Actually can work very well, but we need the will and the desire. And this is what keeps me up at night. We've been doing this for 25, 30 years, and we have not gotten very far. Lori?
Well, thank you. Sorry, the slide is out of sync. Here we go. So the next session is we can move on to some Q&A, and we have some pretty interesting questions. I don't know if we can give Josh a minute here to display those. I'm not sure that Josh is hearing us. So the Q&A is what keeps you up at night? And there we go. And so, and you can see that people, that our crowd here tonight is very curious about our perspectives about compromises in the maritime industry. And actually, I don't know if we're ready for this, but I would really love to hear an answer to this third question here. Have there been any near miss incidents with the electronic chart display systems? That one seems especially vulnerable to me, but I'm not an expert in the technology. Can any of you speak to that?
There have been some trials I know that Iron Dome, an Israeli company, did some years ago, they were able to put malware onto the master's computer, part of a chart update. And when the chart update was made to the ECDIS system, it put on malware onto the entire nav bridge. And the ECDIS was compromised, as was the radar. And I believe there have been some other situations where that has happened. They just have not been widely publicized.
That's right, Gary. And that's another problem we have. It's not unique to the maritime industry. We don't have a place, and we've talked to Merit about this. We've talked to the Coast Guard about this. We don't have a central repository, if you will, or collecting group of all these incidents that are happening. Two reasons. One is people are still very much afraid, and I think that goes back to that brand discussion Steve had earlier. They're afraid of letting people know that they've been attacked, even if there aren't any, especially if there aren't any dramatic consequences to the attack. I think the maritime industry and other industries need some kind of local, global kind of repository where they can share information, what's happening, why it's happening, and understand what the consequences are. I think the only reason there hasn't been a catastrophic problem here is that there hasn't been a reason yet for something like that to happen. We talked the other day, Gary, about doing a no-show blockade of the United States, right? There is a scenario that, like we said, there's only about 80 to 100 seagoing American flag vessels. So a big adversary like China could easily divert most everybody else away from the United States and basically blockade our entire supply chain.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think if I could just real quick add, I agree. I think on having a repository for that, but there's something that I learned very, very quickly within the corporate world within the last year. From the military side, obviously most of the stuff is classified. We don't let that stuff get out. In general, that's because we keep that a tight lid on it. And in the corporate world, it's the same way. We're dealing with shareholders and we're dealing with a lot of those stuff. And so those types of things, letting them out it is hard. And even within the companies themselves, not just with us or with any other company, they really keep those things segmented pretty well. For the attacks. Specifically with ECDIS, certainly, what we do is it goes back to my comments about resiliency and being able to have ways of going around it. So having a master system, a gold DIS standard, and as us navigators that are that stay on the bridge, that the best equipment we have out there are eyes. So when you're looking at the charts, you're looking at this stuff to actually truly be navigators, where you're back to looking at stars, looking at shooting lines of your marks as you go through the channel, particularly where this is going to really be an issue, is having those training backed up so you can realize, hey, I'm really not within the buoys where I'm supposed to be, that type of thing. So I think there's a combination of those things that we have to work through to get kind of back. I think we put too much faith in the electronic stuff as we've gone, and we've kind of backed up from the, hey, we got to get back to the manual operations of some of these things as a backup in case something happens. But the needle's swinging back the other way. You're seeing a lot of that now where we're going back. The Navy's incident several years ago when he had those collisions back, I was part of the investigations of some of the things and what happened, that type of thing. And you've seen a whole change within at least the military's perspective. You're seeing it actually in the maritime environment as well, to get kind of back to old school navigation as well.
I remember back in about 2015 or so when a couple of my Navy buddies said, hey, Gary, you'll be interested to know Naval Academy is bringing back sextant training, which they stopped about 20 years earlier. My colleagues at the Coast Guard Academy remind me they never stopped.
Yeah, they weren't doing MO boards, maneuvering boards, and doing all those classic things. And they're getting back to it now, which is
absolutely.
So can I move on to the next question, gentlemen? So I did mention that the major carriers have all been compromised now. The thing I was struck with each story is how similar their challenges are to the larger international companies in general that are not maritime based. Does anybody want to point out anything specific that lessons learned that we pulled from any of the major compromises?
So this question asks what lessons were learned from these attacks. And so I have a couple of things that I saw that question and I just, almost leapt out of my chair. I think it's very, very important to note that the ransomware attack of which Maersk got caught up in was not directed at Maersk. The NotPetya just collected susceptible systems. They were susceptible. However, it's not just the top 4 shipping lines that have been hammered in the last couple of years. It's 8 of the top 10 shippers have been hammered in the last couple of years. Furthermore, it is the fact that in the last year and a half, there have been probably 15 or more ransomware attacks against maritime assets, not just shippers, but also, or rather not just shipping lines, but also ports and manufacturers and others. What lessons have been learned? Not a damn thing.
Do you agree with this, Dan? I see you nodding.
Yeah.
The fact that they keep happening. So, I'm not sure what lessons have been learned if they keep happening, and some places have gotten nailed twice by 2 different ransomware campaigns.
Right. And it's not unique to the maritime industry. I mean, no. What happened at Colonial Pipeline, what happened at the meat packing, I mean, this is part of this, and I'm not going to provide, I don't have any classified information to provide, but if you look at it logically, some of this is a lost leader, if you will. The people right now, the cyber attacks are they look random, but they're doing things for reasons, and they've been doing things like this for a very long time. I mean, you can go far back as Target. I mean, the only difference between what happened at Target and what happened to Maersk is all of a sudden they got this really neat PKI capability where now I don't have to steal your data. I can just make it unavailable to you, or I can make your system unavailable to you. It's just a different kind of attack. And remember, whether it's what they're calling cyber criminals now, and I don't know exactly what that means yet, whether it's a state or a non-nation state, it's all about money and disruption. And especially when you're talking about a global company like Maersk. Now, what can force something to happen, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but GDPR is very interesting. It has potential to have some teeth, but until somebody comes in there and the loss of not complying with GDPR is more than just paying off a ransom or something like that. Everything's pragmatic. As Steve said, these companies are public companies. Their job is to make money for their shareholders, and they got to do that, and they got to preserve their brand. It's a very slippery slope, but I think what Gary said is absolutely right, and that's what keeps me up at night. Is we haven't learned anything in 25 years. Everything is just happening over and over again.
I want to follow up on something Dan said. I think it's important to understand a little bit about the attacker, because their motivation and their reward is going to be different. A cyber criminal just wants your money. And that's why if you pay them the ransom, they give you your files back because they want a good rating on Yelp. Because if they don't give you your files back, people will post reviews and say, hey, if you get hit by this, don't pay the ransom. If it is an actual nation state who is really trying to take you down, they're not interested in your money. They're interested in keeping you down. And so I think that's where it really does a little bit come into play, knowing something who your attacker is.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd like to add to one quick. I think I look at this a lot. It really reminds me a lot of pirates. And you had those pirates that were off of Somalia and everything else. And so you always ask, well, why the heck wouldn't they? Why don't they just steer the ships, 1,000, 1,500 miles off and around? It says, well, because it costs more money to do that than just to pay the ransom. And when you do the math,
That's right.
it's a numbers game. It's just so if the attacks aren't going to impact enough where it makes a difference, then it's going to stay that way until it becomes you either get hit by regulation as was mentioned earlier, where that becomes a harder issue, or just the cost is that much more, because you're playing a risk. The ships keep cruising through, when they were doing the they were taking hostages, but they give the ships back. The game changed when they started killing hostages.
Right.
Okay. That's when the game changed. When the game changed, and then that forced a lot of people to do a lot of things, public opinion, everything trying to change. We need that game changer that's going to change at some point. And I think you'll see some. But some of these ecosystems we're dealing with, like at Maersk and some of these, are just so huge, and to be able to make those changes financially for a one in, I don't know, you say it's going to happen. It is going to. We all know it's going to happen, but it's a calculative risk math problem in the end of the day.
Yeah.
Steve, should we be paying ransoms?
Well, I mean, you have a lot of times you have companies have insurance that deals with that. There's and that's another issue as far as companies have cybersecurity insurance. A lot of people have it. You can get them just like anything else that covers the cost of some of these things that are on there. And so when we talk about the other question about whether or not stuff gets put out, well, many companies won't have rules just like your insurance where you can't see certain things because you're covered by the insurance. So there's that's hindering some of the information from getting out to, as well as with the shareholders and stuff. But I think paying a ransom is just like anything else. I mean, that's a personal individual company thing, whether they want to do that or not, based off of their risk profile.
So I like this last question. Given that the majority of our seaports are owned by cities, how does that enable or inhibit cybersecurity?
I don't know that that's correct. I don't know that that's a correct assumption. Most of the seaports are not owned by cities.
So
in fact,
is it different when you're dealing with a municipality versus private enterprise or military, et cetera?
Well, I mean, as this old saying goes, if you've seen one port, you've seen one port. One of the biggest intellectual property challenges, actually, that we are having right now is the fact that China has an ownership interest or operation interest or a presence at I don't even know how many dozens of ports around the world. And given the requirement for Chinese companies to report information back to the Chinese government, the intelligence gathering capability that they have all over the world is incredible. Their purchase of the port in Haifa in Israel, where the Sixth Fleet spends a lot of time, not to mention ports in the United States, that is really, I think, one of the issues. And I don't know that has any. I don't think it has much bearing on the cyber protections of the port, because really where the port comes into play in the cyber protection is the organization of, does the port provide the entire infrastructure, or does it just provide the infrastructure for its own operation, and tenants have to figure out their own? Do they connect to ships? So that's really where totally different.
They're going to go where the money is too. So if you got a bankrupt municipality that owns a port.
So to what degree do we have regulatory leadership helping us with this? Is it standard? How much does it help?
Very, very slim in the maritime industry. The question, there was a second question on the board here, is about aviation, has an aviation safety reporting system. Maritime industry does have a safety reporting system, but cybersecurity has not been dictated or regulated as a safety issue. We've been trying to get it as a safety of life at sea issue, and identified as such by the Coast Guard, et cetera. The Coast Guard's position has been that they're already getting too many complaints about the number of regulations on U.S. shipping. And that's another part. One of the reasons there's only less than 100 U.S. flagged ships is because we have a lot of regulations, but most of the ships that come in and out of our ports aren't U.S. flagged ships. So that's a balance that, there is no international regulation. IMO is trying to do some things. But as Gary said earlier, IMO is often ignored.
I think also, I agree with Dan. Coast Guard is certainly has put out some guidelines for ports and the kind of security. At least the fact is that all ports need to have a security plan. And so now they need to have a cybersecurity annex. What that annex precisely has to look like and what it has to say is a little bit vague. It doesn't apply to ships unless they're in US waters. So if a ship has a safety issue, it needs to report it. And the Coast Guard is trying to make the case that cyber is a safety issue, so we need to know about it. But again, you know, it's sort of drawing the line of what is a cyber issue and what gets reportable. And so it's not quite as rigorous as we have in some aspects of aviation. The other thing is aviation is not nearly as global as maritime. And I mean that in the sense that if you're a US flag carrier, or a foreign carrier for that matter, you can't fly from Sydney, Australia to Los Angeles and then Duluth and Dallas and, you know, and then fly back out. You fly to international gateways. And then within a country, it has to be the intra-national flag carriers. Whereas a ship, as Dan said, you know, today it's the US and then at warp speed, tomorrow it's Brazil. And then it's the Med, and then it's Asia. And so that is truly global.
But the thing that is keeping us and the Jones Act and some of those things alive is the fact that coastal trade is supposed to be done with American flag versus, I think Steve probably has some stories about what Royal Caribbean was not allowed to do given the Alaska cruises because they couldn't, they had a dock, Oconus, and they didn't have a place to dock. They couldn't go from one US port to another US port. But the you know, let's see what, you know, just as an example, something we've done, Coast Guard was involved with, and what is the utility? And I don't know how many of you are in the maritime industry per se directly, but I was very involved with the TWIC card, the Transportation Workers Identification Credential. In broad terms, it's very much like the Common Access card the DoD people use to get on base, to log onto their computer, to do all of those really neat things, okay? If you go to the Coast Guard instruction section on how to use a TWIC card, it alludes to the fact that there's a chip on that card with a authentication credential on it that's been vetted through the government. Gives you no information on how to use it, no information on how to use it in a computer, no information on how to set up your systems to use it for authentication. When you talk to them about it, now this is Department of Homeland Security, and I'm not being critical, it's a monster. But the Coast Guard says that's a TSA program, the TSA says that's a Coast Guard program, and guess who's getting nothing done? And who's paying for it? If you go around the United States right now, whether you're a trucker, a merchant mariner, whatever it is, if you're working in and out of ports, you need a driver's license that you need to show. You need to show your TWIC card. You need to show probably a port access card, and you probably need a card from one of the shippers you're servicing. And the only thing they look at is the barcode and the picture. So we added, you know, let's say a piece of plastic is $2 to process, maybe $5 to process. We added cryptographic functionality to another card. Basically, we call it $150, $200 card, and we're not doing anything else with it but using it as a flash pass. That's what keeps me up at night. We don't use the tools we have to be able to conquer some of these problems. And I think at some point, and I think it's coming because you see it in many industries, including maritime, where the brand thing is really becoming important. And the ability to do your job and do the job effectively is always been important. They are going to have to self-manage this. The problem with that is everybody does it differently, right? So if I'm a trucker going from the port of LA and then I drive down to San Diego, I probably have 2 different systems or more to deal with. Until we get this more coordinated and working together and kumbaya, we're going to have a lot more problems.
Well, I like this. I like this last question here on the screen, and it's a little bit of a switch of gears. And I'd like to direct it to Steve because of his background, because the world has really changed, and this is a warfare question, which is not something you find in civilian attacks. But the question is, what constitutes a modern act of war? What's the difference between a blockade against a port versus a cyber attack? And Steve, can you answer that for us?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tough one. If I was back wearing my uniform, I'd have to get my legal team together to come up with what's what does that mean? It's always been a challenge because you don't know where these attacks are coming from, and so just being able to pinpoint that back. I mean, that's why if you go back from a military perspective, put some stuff. That's why the authorities to do an offensive attack against a nation state, for example, resides at a very, very high level within the U.S. government for that very reason. So you can't have, say, an individual captain at sea, if he even had the authorities or had the tools to do it. I'm just using it as an example, or even a lower level commander to be able to do that within the services. It has to be up at the joint level and at a much higher, usually coming from White House level type stuff. It's for that because they, to be able to make those decisions in that. So it's really hard, but definitely it's definitely how do you know if it's really a nation state for this stuff? I mean, you could argue that, I've been out of it. I don't have any back of the intel of it but I mean, the pipeline issue, where did that come from? And these countries in the past have used proxy states to do cyber attacks. And in some cases, they're done nothing more than to say, hey, we're still here. Don't forget about us. We can reach out and poke you and just create a nuisance. And that's sometimes just enough. Because what you're doing, because it's more of a strategic level of attack. So it's definitely a challenging thing when you talk about where's the line for war. I mean, when are we going to send over bombers if they do X? So where's those lines? I don't know.
and what kind of war is that going to be? Is that going to be a physical war we're used to, or is it going to be an avatar war? Right. The legal aspects, the legal and political aspects of this are very interesting. The blockade versus a cyber attack is very interesting. And just today, I read an article. I got to vet it a little bit, but it reported that the United States government is now building a force to cyber attack cyber criminals. So I think I asked the question, what do you think, what legally, what is a cyber criminal? If you identify someone as a cyber criminal, given our legal system, I think we would have to do some kind of legal vetting and convict them, if you will, in a court of law before we can do something to that person in response. If we're looking at it as a crime, I don't know the answer. I'm not a lawyer, but what I think is interesting is a lot of these problems are being adjudicated as if they were physical, and they're not. And we have to look at it a little bit differently. I'm hoping we do a lot more on the attacking side, and I suspect we do. as a response anyhow. But you have to have the will. You have to have the will, and the political and the legal will, to move forward with some of this stuff. And I don't know that we've had that.
I think the offensive capability has actually been there for decades. I was actually teaching in the Army Information Ops School 20 years ago when I still lived in Vermont. But Steve pointed out, and this is the problem, it's attribution. If you send ships for a blockade or you fire a missile at me, I can figure out the latitude and longitude where that missile came from. If you launch a cyber attack from me, and all the forensic evidence in the world is only going to be able to give me a strong probability of who the attacker is. Because if I'm a really good attacker, I can pretend to be a different attacker. And so you don't want to launch an attack in response if you can't be sure of who is attacking you in the first place. And in fact, I only know of one incident where there was a kinetic response to a cyber attack. Mm-hmm. And now there is something called the Talon Manual that does supposedly provide some legal and academic framework for what is a cyber war. But, and again, Steve sort of alluded to this. I'm waiting for the day for a country to invoke NATO Article 5 in response to attacks we get from China. Article 5 is the Mutual Defense Clause. We've been in a cyber war with China for over a decade. And the US has never said, we're going to attack back with rockets and we expect our NATO allies to support us. I mean, that day, I just don't see that happening. So, but I think that the key difference between a blockade and a cyber attack, as Dan alluded to, is we're trying to look at cyber things, but we still think about it the way we think about real space. And that we have to change that mindset.
The scary thing about that, Gary, what you were talking about is there has been reports, I don't know how substantiated, but that there are attempts to launch kinetic attacks remotely with a cyber attack. So they attack one nation to attack another nation kinetically.
Yeah, okay.
And then the question is, if we start seeing a missile coming over and it's from, I don't know, Iran, who really launched it? Because they don't have strong cybersecurity. But that's a different story.
Yeah, this spirals into a very dark place very quickly.
And actually, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take one more audience question, and then I have a wrap-up question for each of you. So our final audience question will be, in each panelist's opinion, what would be the worst case scenario in maritime cybersecurity? And let's go in the original order. Stephen, why don't you go first?
All right, so worst case scenario. So yeah, I've got to run through these in my head. We've started, talked about them. So, if I was going to do something from Mary, I talked a little bit about that, where a bad day would be that, a ship would be taken over. But I think if you're looking at it from, I put on my back when I was in the Navy back in Norfolk and stuff. If you're familiar with Norfolk, you've got a very largest Navy base. And then you also have the Port of Virginia, which is right there, which isn't the biggest port, but it's a pretty good sized port on the east, but it's right next to the Norfolk. And I mean, they literally bump right up to each other. And then you got to go through all the tunnels and stuff to get out through the channels and everything. So I would think something would be boy, could you turn around and take myself a liquid gas container ship or something like that and run that ship into the Hampton Roads Bridge tunnel? And you'd spill all that oil out and you would, open the valves up, you damage the bridge, you dock that up, and then you could bottle up a significant part of our fleet in Norfolk by doing something like that. If you were going to try to do an attack on a ship by taking over the navigation and their pumps control stuff, they pump the stuff over the side. If you could do that, and whatever that would be what I would think would be a really bad day.
A bad day.
Gary, your turn.
I was actually thinking about that question because sometimes I think overly big. I've been a professional paranoid since about 1979. I try not to let it creep into the rest of my life, but that's what I do. I think doing anything that would cause people to lose confidence in shipping, that would prevent ships from moving. I mean, Steve gave a great example. I mean, we have all sorts of choke points all over the place. But I guess one of the things that I've thought about, and I guess I'll throw this out as my entry. I'm going to assume everybody's familiar with Stuxnet. Well, what would happen if somebody were able to inject a Stuxnet-like vulnerability during the manufacturing of a vessel into some system on the vessel? And hackers in the old days used to break into a system, and then they'd deface it and they'd put up all sorts, weird stuff. For the last 20 years, hackers break into a system and they stay there until it's convenient for them. So if I have this Stuxnet type of vulnerability that's just been manufactured into 20 or 30 ships that I can decide when I want to exploit, I mean, that to me, the ripple effect would be incredible, because it wouldn't be just one ship in Virginia. It would be a ship in Virginia, while another ship's in Kill-Van-Kull, while another's in the Suez, while another's in the Panama Canal, and and the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, you can just sort of put them anywhere you want.
Daniel, your turn.
Yeah, so I think we talked about it earlier. I think the national blockade is, and we're seeing what it can do to our nation right now. And I don't think it's a cyber. I have no evidence that there's any cyber attack going on with what's going on right now. But our lifeblood is coming in and out through our ports, and a cyber attack could, I don't know how easy, but it could completely blockade our supply chain, both coasts, Gulf Coast, the whole 9 yards, and it would be dramatic. It would be dramatic in quick order. And I don't think it would happen by itself. I think they would hit, the water supply, the trucking supply,
Yeah.
and we talked a little bit about autonomous and AI. That frightens me to no end, because the more autonomy we do, the more we rely on artificial intelligence, we're not going to know. They're going to know what's going on before we know what's happened. And, 0 day is still months before we figure out we have been attacked.
Without showing how much my dark side is, I used to teach in a Homeland Security program. That's where I taught cyber. But there was a saying in Homeland Security that we are 9 missed meals away from anarchy.
That's right.
Well, so there's been a lot of sobering information shared with us today, but what I'd like to do now, I'd like to share with everybody the positive side. And I want to give each of you gentlemen a chance to share a positive development with us, either something that's recent or something that's currently ongoing. We'll go back in original order. Each one of you has such a unique perspective. And it's hard to see progress when you're standing close. Sometimes you can only see it in retrospect, or if you're at the 10,000 foot level. Stephen, what would you say? What's a positive development?
Yeah, for positive, I would say, but I'll use Royal Caribbean as an example. That's one of the, I mentioned earlier, maritime is very, very slow, and has been slow in coming up on the cybersecurity side, just due to the culture and the background and history. But I would say that within the cruise line industry is really starting to improve drastically. And I think that, it's not, I'm a little biased, obviously, but I think we in Royal Caribbean have done a great job at developing a maritime cybersecurity program. Other brands have done sort of the same sort of thing. So I think you're seeing a lot of this sort of coming out, understand the importance. We've done a pretty good job of getting after our OT systems, and at least putting in monitoring and knowing what we have there. Baseline is always a challenge, but we're getting better at that too. Better at monitoring some of the stuff that's out there. So we have remote, SOCs and things like that, where we can actually, monitor our networks that way. So, and you're seeing a change in, you're seeing a change in the culture a little bit up there. I mean, ship captains and ship engineers in the cruise line, again, the guys have been around for a very, very long time. Great guys, really motivated, but you're seeing a lot more of them come back and say, hey, look, this is important, and I want to know more about it. And you're seeing that more when you go out on the ships. They really want to get involved. They really want to understand what's kind of going on in that cyber realm. And I think that's a real big positive thing. And I think it's just going to continue to increase. And the funding we've gotten and the support throughout our organization is another thing that's been just fantastic. So you get a lot of support through the higher up. That's always been a challenge. I think a lot is, you can't do it. You don't have funding and you don't have the support. You can only do so much. But we're growing our teams. We're growing our people. We're growing our organization at a pretty rapid rate. And we never cut it at all during COVID. So because they understood the importance, we could not reduce the cybersecurity posture of the ship. So we continue to push for that. So I would say that would be the positive. I think you're seeing a change in some of the views of what it means for cyber in the maritime.
Gary?
Well, I agree with you that every critical incident stress debrief should end with showing people the light. I agree with Steve that attitudes are changing, albeit real slowly. But more and more companies, more and more maritime companies or maritime stakeholders have information security officers that are separate and distinct from their chief information technology officer, which I think is a good thing because I think information security and IT are different skill sets. Big overlap, obviously, but they're different skill sets. I think we're beginning to talk about this so much more than we did even 3 years ago. And while there are a lot of companies that are saying, oh my God, what do I do? At least they're asking, what do I do? And 2 years ago, they were pretending that this problem didn't exist. So I think things are changing slowly. They're changing more slowly than I like, but of course I've got 40 years where things have been moving more slowly than I like. But I guess that would be my bright spot. Things are looking up. It's a good business to be in. It's a good industry to be in, and there's lots of opportunity for good.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, Dan, what have you got for us?
So I'll start with a personal thing. My second grandchild, my first grandson, was born 4.5 hours ago.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
That's
terrific.
That's a bright star in my sky. I've been semi-retired now for a little bit, and I've put, I said I'd never come back, but I've put my interest and some of my fortune into this new program that the DoD is kicking off, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, because I don't think it's perfect. I don't think it's the best thing I've seen since sliced bread, but it is a consolidated, coordinated model to move forward. I would like to see industry. I'd like to see the maritime industry. That's why I'm working with MyTags. That's why I'm working with Maritime TV and other groups. I'd like to see the maritime industry, step up and do, we can call it self-regulation, but really embrace this cybersecurity model. Because I think the future of our country, the future of our culture is all betting on this working out. And if it doesn't work out, I think I'm going to have my grandchildren learn Mandarin.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. It has been such a pleasure being your moderator tonight. We really appreciate the effort and your expertise this evening. Very enlightening, very enlightening. And thank you to the ISSA-LA audience for your stimulating questions. Always love a good audience. Do we have a host to take this back?
If not, I just like to say thank you, Lori. Thank you for doing a great job moderating.
Yes.
Oh, appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all, and thank my fellow panelists. This was a lot of fun.
Yep, thank you all.
It has been great fun. And if we don't have a host that'll take this back from us, ISSA-LA does meet every month. This particular format, doing a panel, is a little bit unusual, but here we go, and we have Mark. Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah, good job, everybody. And congrats, Dan.
Thank you.
ISSA-LA meets every month, and we do have a speaker. Does anybody have the speaker for next month?
Yeah, I believe that's Chad, our own vendor director.
Do we have a topic?
We do. I wasn't prepared to answer it. It'd be really good though.
That's just mean, isn't it? Okay. Well, thank you very much. We really appreciate your support tonight. And once again, thank you for attending, all the attendees out there. And I look forward to seeing everybody at next month's meeting. And
Have a
take
good
care.
night. Bye-bye.
And congratulations again, Dan.
Thank
Kiss that
you.
baby for us.
I'm excited.